Welcome to The Big Story. I'm Gretchen Ho.
I'm Pauline Verzosa.
And I'm Shawn Yao.
Tonight's big stories. The 2025 national budget is drawing flack for controversial insertions and cuts, which is why Senator Araneta-Marcos has this appeal to her brother, the president, scrutinize the budget before signing.
Now, a former COA commissioner says there's nothing wrong with the use of fictitious names or aliases in confidential fund disbursement, but on certain conditions.
And convicted drug trafficker Jane Veloso could be back home soon. She has been transferred to a Jakarta prison for the repatriation process.
More questions are being raised over the national budget for 2025. Of particular concern are the lack of subsidy for PhilHealth and also the big budget cut for the Department of Education.
Now, President Bongbong Marcos is not objecting to the state insurer's zero budget, but vows to fix the DepEd fund. He also explained why the Department of Public Works and Highways is getting the lion's share of the funds.
But if it were up to the president's sister, there should be no hurry in approving next year's budget. Senator Araneta-Marcos tells her brother this needs much more than just a once-over. Maricel Halili with a big story tonight.
President Marcos does not see anything wrong with a bicameral committee giving PhilHealth zero subsidy for 2025. He agrees with lawmakers that the state health insurer can more than survive on its reserve funds of about 500 billion pesos. That's since PhilHealth only needs 260 billion pesos per year to efficiently operate.
I know na naaabala ang tao because bakit natin binawasan? Dahil ang katotohanan dyan ay kung tignan ninyo, kaya binawi ng Department of Finance yung ilang reserve na naman doon na naiwan dahil hindi nagamit yun ng ilang taon. In other words, the PhilHealth has sufficient budget to do all of the things that they want to do.
Besides, PBBM says PhilHealth's problem is not the budget, but its system as a whole.
The reason that we do not want to subsidize it is because it is the subsidy will hook lang doon sa bank account ng PhilHealth, hindi magagamit. Eh marami tayong paggagamitan noon. So that's a simple explanation there.
Of bigger concern for the chief executive is the Education Department. He believes the reduction of the DepEd's budget by as much as 10 billion pesos is against government policies. The president promises to do something about this.
So we're working on it to make sure that we will restore it. I do not want to line item veto anything because that just gets in the way.
Bearing the brunt of the DepEd budget cut is its computerization program. President Marcos says this is vital to his administration's policy direction to strengthen STEM, or science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. But congressmen have been questioning the computerization project, particularly when Vice President Sara Duterte was still the DepEd chief. They cited laptops purchased in 2023 but are yet to be distributed to teachers, and the underutilization of funds. It turned out that only 2 billion of the 11 billion peso budget for the project was used in 2023.
Nung nakaraang mga panahon, nagiging notorious ang DepEd, no, sa pagiging delay nila sa kanilang mga procurement, no? At lalong-lalo na yung pag-uphold nila ng transparency and accountability.
Under the Constitution, the Education Department should get the lion's share of the national budget. But in the BICAM version of the 2025 coffers, the DPWH gets the biggest share of the pie at 1.1 trillion pesos, while DepEd gets 737 billion pesos. President Marcos defends funding infrastructure since much-needed flood control initiatives are also included in this. Despite several questions on the national allocations, President Marcos is on track to approve it before Christmas, something his sister Senator Aimee says should not happen until PBBM fully scrutinizes the budget. The senator is specifically questioning the restoration of the budget for AKAP, or the Ayuda sa Kapos ang Kita program. She appeals to her brother to think before signing.
Sinusuway ka ng mga taong akala mo makakabuti para sa iyo at sa bayan. Nako, kaya issue at pondo ng budget, line by line yan. Yung sinasabing may kasunduan, may areglo, at naghati-hati yung Congress at yung Senado, teka nga, mali yan. Ayokong mapahamak ang administrasyon. Election year pa naman, nagkakaroon talaga ng duda kung ano ba talaga yan. Vote buying ba yan?
For News 5, Maricel Halili, We Are One News.
Let's crunch numbers from the 2025 budget with the help of Ibon Foundation Executive Director Sunny Africa. Welcome to the big story, Sunny.
Hi, good evening, everyone.
Okay, first of all, there have been a lot of criticism with the 2025 budget, and there was even an analyst who said that this is one of the worst budgets that he has seen. What would be your assessment as to the hits and misses? And pinaliwanag na ng Kongreso bakit nila kinat yung budget ng ilang mga departamento. Is performance a good basis to have such huge cuts in the budget?
The budget overall, the budget including the revenue program, it should be the expression of a whole holistic strategy for social and economic development. Our main problem with the budget, even as submitted, it didn't give enough for agriculture. It's not giving anything for domestic industry. It's not actually subsidizing the expansion of public social services, while on the other hand, giving too much stress on infrastructure and debt service. Ang problema actually dumaan pa sa BICAM, yung problema na hindi pinansin ng agrikultura, industriya, serbisyo, while prioritizing infrastructure, lalong lumala pa. So sa amin, may malaking problema with the budget process. It's so weird. Parang serial certifies urgency, President Marcos. Every budget he has passed since he came into power has been certified as urgent. Despite the absence of a calamity, despite the absence of an emergency, he sent a political signal, I just want this rush, I don't want much discussion. So para sa amin, malaking problema yung disenyo ng budget, yung proseso. Hindi actually pinapakinggan yung pangailangan ng karamihan. Secondly, it's not actually reflecting a real economic development program. And that's, I think, the catastrophic portion of the budget.
Well, a lot of critics actually, Sunny, are saying na there has been a trend, right? Starting from the start of this administration and even before. When we talk about confidential funds, since yun yung mainit na issue before, no, napapansin natin lumalaki. That's also a trend. The trend now is I guess, unprogrammed appropriations ballooning and a lot of things happening at the BICAM that we are not seeing, right? Are you guys over at Ibon, are you planning to file a case against this? Are you seeing the Constitution being violated here?
We are talking actually with some representatives. You could probably guess who they are. There is a need to question first, actually, the certification as urgent. I mean, every budget is urgent. I mean, if you look at their rationalization, they say it's to deal with existing challenges, it's to be flexible. It's a lot of motherhoods, but there's no calamity or emergency as usually presumed to be in the case of bills certified as urgent. So I think that is questionable right there. Secondly, yes, exactly. I think people are so used to confidential intelligence funds. People are forgetting even the Office of the President has huge confidential intelligence funds. In the last year of President Noynoy Aquino, it was only about 711 million pesos. By the end of President Duterte's term, it was 4.5 billion. And that same practice, bloated confidential intelligence funds for the president, was maintained by the current president. So yes, we do think it is something that should be given more oversight. But of course, the question is, no one questions the president's budget, supposedly with this absurd parliamentary tradition. But I think if people aren't going to be exercising oversight for the funds of those at the top, not just of the vice president, even the president, that sends a very bad signal in terms of what's your accountability for the funds, public funds that you're holding. So I think that is something that has to be addressed. In terms of magnitudes, it's not, the few tens of millions of pesos in CIF, that's, it's a trickle compared to the 6.5 almost billion peso budget. But again, it's the principle behind it. If public officials can get away with spending without accountability, or with accountability only from a Congress that is unfortunately servile to the executive, that sends a very bad signal about corruption all the way down to the local level. So I think it has to be addressed. The unprogrammed funds, again, it's a good point. it's crazy. Last year's budget, well, this year's budget, it's about 5.7, 5.8 trillion. The BICAM committee, in their few meetings, they juggled around 1 trillion pesos. This year, they juggled around 860 billion pesos. That's about 470 billion in realignments, and then the about 370 billion in additional program appropriations. And again, very dubious, and medyo kabastusan na sinabi nila, ibubukas namin sa publiko. But things were not actually transparent even in that BICAM process. So I think those two have to be addressed. On top of our more fundamental problem, the budget should be the expression of a real development strategy based on the needs of Filipinos and the economy. But it isn't. It really isn't.
Sonny.
It's austerity for the poor and social services, while maintaining budgets for pork patronage and infrastructure that benefits just a few
Sonny,
corporations.
On this same thought, right, we have spoken to a bunch of lawmakers here on this very show. We've asked them about, the confidential funds of other civilian agencies. And of course, a lot of people would say that the president, as the commander-in-chief of the police force and the AFP, that he deserves to have some sort of a CIF, right? But that's not just the point. They also mentioned that, nobody complained about the use and the liquidation of the confidential funds of so-and-so agency. That's why we're not looking into it and we're not exercise our oversight powers to look into the budget. Should we just file complaints so para masilip yung mga confidential funds so ibang ahensya? Like, how do we even begin to tackle this problem?
Actually, the guidelines released on CIF are fantastic. There are lots of pages, a lot of controls. It identifies the role of the COA, it identifies the role of Congress. It defines what are allowable and not allowable. Actually, if that was implemented well, that could be done. The core problem is the main body that should be exercising oversight over the budget, Congress, they are too slavish to the president. I mean, I think a bit of an original sin. When they shifted the pork barrel from the PIDA, from all the budget deliberations, and that was declared unconstitutional, it was shifted actually earlier in the budget process, in the budget called the start of the year. The president now actually has even more control over pork of legislators. I think that's a huge, inadvertent consequences. That was a huge step backward because from pork being discussed openly, transparently, where we could criticize that, pork was shifted behind the scenes, even more under the control of the president. So now you have to ask, who legislator would dare to actually challenge the president when he has complete control of the pork, which is not even going to be discussed in open session? So I think that's an inadvertent consequence of the Supreme Court decision on pork barrel. There are, of course, a few legislators, especially among the progressive parties groups, who can challenge that, but they need help. I mean, they need the access to the information, they need COA reports, they need documentation, and it's easy to file a case, but again, you also have to prove your case, and there's so many barriers to that case being proved. Having said that, honestly, the guidelines for CIF use, they're actually fantastic. They just need to actually be implemented with the right sort of political, it's such a cliche, with the right political will for that.
Okay, Sonny, let me get your thoughts on one of the most controversial things about this budget, right? The zero budget for PhilHealth and the huge budget cut for the Department of Education. Lawmakers said binibigyan nila ng leksyon, or they're lecturing the inefficiency of these agencies' leaders. What are your thoughts on that? No, saying na parang parusa yon, it's a punishment on efficiency, on their inefficiency. But what's the impact of these as well on the members and stakeholders of the DepEd?
Okay, actually, just sort of round out the picture, the BICAM debilitated the education budget, not just for DepEd, but even for higher education. There was a little bit of an increase in SUCs, but there was a huge 27 billion cut in CHED. So on balance, higher education actually gets about a 20 billion peso cut on top of the 12 billion cut in more basic education by DepEd. So we're looking at more or less 30, 40 billion cut in education. Bottom line, to the extent that people rely on the government for public education, that is a diminishing of the educational services they will be getting. Same thing actually with PhilHealth. There's actually quite a big, I think 26, 27 billion cut in the Department of Health on top of the 74 billion denial of PhilHealth. We have our issues with PhilHealth as a financing program. We actually are more biased towards a public health system. But having said that, we work with what we have. The cuts in DOH and PhilHealth, in the same way that cuts in DepEd and SHED cut education services, DOH and PhilHealth cuts will diminish health services directly and indirectly. But also have to add, the agriculture budget was cut by a huge amount. The DA budget was cut by 20 billion. The NIA, Education Administration budget was cut by 23 billion. If we're so worried about food, agriculture productivity has been falling for the past 3 years in a row. It's crazy to actually be cutting agriculture budgets when we need to increase production, productivity to lower the prices. So I think it's just that huge across the board almost cut in DepEd, in SHED, in DOH, PhilHealth, adding the Department of Agriculture and NIA. It really is unconscionable given rising prices of food, rising poverty, and when people don't have enough incomes, they rely on the public health system and the public education system. And if the government is not supporting that, preferring to give, almost 300 billion more in DPWH, even House Representatives. I mean, it's so brazen. They got about a 18 billion peso increase. I think it's hugely warped priorities because the budget process from start to finish is captured by political self-interest, not the social good, not the social need.
Well, lawmakers are saying that PhilHealth already has, I think, 400
plus.
400 billion in
400
excess
billion.
funds. And they need about 70 plus billion in government subsidy, which they can provide on their own, and they're not being efficient. Why not spend all of that excess fund? And in the end, it goes to program appropriations. I mean, what would you have to say about that? What can PhilHealth actually do with that excess money? Because I don't think we've gotten to the bottom of that.
Yeah.
So,
Gretch,
ano pwede nilang gawin dun sa
to
pera
add to
na
that,
yun?
kanina nga sabi ng mga congressmen sa press con nila is because tinignan daw nila, Sonny, yung kumbaga yung pagkaka-disburse or yung utilization ng PhilHealth, and they found it to be kind of below average, and that's why parang they won't be able to use that money anyway. The president has given also, yes, he gave his own estimate. They only need 260 billion for this year or for next year, for 2025. I mean, how do we really estimate how much we need for health, right? That was my question when I heard him say that. Your thoughts?
Yeah, it's a bit weird. I mean, we follow reports. We tried monitoring the hearings as well in the budget. I think one question that should be asked: the PhilHealth does not provide services. PhilHealth is a financing scheme to subsidize patients when they get services from the private sector or from the diminishing public hospitals. So it's a bit weird to actually demand that PhilHealth spend everything. For instance, because it's a financing scheme, not a direct health provider, presumably, I'm just guessing, there should be actuarial studies saying how much in reserve funds PhilHealth should have, given the profile of morbidity, mortality in the Philippines, given the sort of needs, given the expense of healthcare. That should be factored into having a fund. Because look at it this way, it doesn't make sense. If PhilHealth had zero excess funds, what about when COVID happens? What about when a pandemic, when some other pandemic strikes? What about when there's an upsurge in whatever cancer cases or whatever, or increase in benefits? So there's that. It's a bit wrong to expect that PhilHealth should not have reserve funds. But again, I want to be clear. We'd have a major issue with PhilHealth as a financing scheme being effective in terms of providing public health. If the government was sincere in providing affordable, accessible healthcare to the majority of Filipinos, a health financing scheme is not the best method because PhilHealth incentivizes private profit-seeking providers, which drives up the price of health. Money is better spent on expanding a public health system, providing quality services at affordable prices, maybe even free, to Filipinos. Now, on the point of absorptive capacity, it's kind of a chicken and egg. Kasi, if you have to spend to increase the opportunity for services, that is a government responsibility. If they're not doing that, it's the wrong solution to the right problem to cut the budget, because cutting the budget will penalize not the institution. They're going to get the same salaries. I mean, they're going to be as is institution, but those beneficiaries, the Filipinos, will get their services cramped. So we'd argue, if there's a problem with absorptive capacity, if there's a problem with corruption and inefficiency, let's sort out how the government is run. Let's have a more effective system. Let's actually get more accountability for weird purchases of drugs or weird purchases of equipment. I mean, let's work on that. I mean, it's a bit unfair to be punishing the Filipinos who need healthcare for the failings of government. And it's a government responsibility, get your house in order, get your act together, provide the service you need to provide. Not, I think that framing of, this to incentivize them, it's not to incentivize them. They're going to get the same salaries anyway. So, it's not even going to be effective on that narrow metric of success that we want.
Sunny, based on the trend that you're noticing, of course we know that this will be an election budget because it's a 2025 budget, which is the midterms. Do you see some sort of trend continuing after the midterms? Since, the tendency is if you can get away with these insertions, is you'll keep doing it, right? I mean, any person, I think, you try to push, right? And if no one pushes back, then you can get more. Do you see this continuing until after the midterms, or should it improve, quote unquote, after the elections?
Well, for instance, let's take that super controversial ACAP. It's very weird that the 4-piece program was cut by 50 billion pesos. It was a 114 billion peso program. It's now about 64 billion. So the 4-piece program was cut by 50 billion. Then the ACAP, which was not in the budget submitted to Congress after the SONA, which Speaker Martin allegedly inserted, like he did for 2024, the 26 billion budget for that right now. I think that's a good case study because the 4-piece, at the very least, it's gone through a long process over the last decade and a half of getting the beneficiaries listed, getting a system for monitoring who gets what. So again, with 4.5 million beneficiaries, there was going to be leakages, but more or less, it's they spend about 7 or 8% of the program funds on administrative costs. So there are listed beneficiaries in the 4-piece. The ACAP is crazy. They have this really absurd, who are going to be beneficiaries? If they're below minimum wage, that's 2/3 of Filipinos are below minimum wage. Filipinos in this situation, oh my God, every Filipino is economically distressed. Well, not everybody, but the huge majority is economically distressed right now. So, they have these nice words, but it's hiding basically a completely discretionary fund. And I'm not even sure how to interpret what Senator Po said. There's 5 billion for Senate and then 21 billion for Congress. That's a slush fund. That's so weird. So again, I think it's very revealing. Poverty has not worsened. Since the start of the administration, poverty has increased, whether by SWS, by WR numerous survey outfits. The Bangko Sentral has monitored more Filipinos losing their savings. Categorically, over the last 2.5 years, increasing poverty, increasing hunger, definitely increasing need for ayuda. So it's so weird right now that 4-piece was cut by 50 billion with all the listed beneficiaries and replaced with this absurd ACAP program, 5 for the Senate, 21 for Congress, and then, the beneficiaries are those who don't get minimum wage.
Sunny,
those
honest,
are in crisis.
Sunny, can I ask you, were you honestly hoping that Senate would put a stop to it? Because it certainly looked like that before it went to BICAM.
Yes.
We were all hoping.
For checks and balances.
Yeah, and because they were already upset about it, and then all of a sudden, I think we were all fairly shocked that natuloy siya, and basically, I guess people would say it as, kasi nasama na sila, so all the complaints stopped. Is that kind of how you see it too?
Something like that seems to be happening. Again, it's hard to comment because I don't actually understand what Senator Grace Po said na may hatian na 5 billion, 16 billion, 21 billion. But for me, the bottom line, we have to start with the Philippine political system. The president decides on pork. The president decides on the budget.
Wait,
the president decides what Congress does or does not do. He can do something about that. If he wanted to rein in his cousin, he could do that quite easily. The ACAP, that was crazy. We have a strong suspicion, we'll see when the core reports come out, we have a strong suspicion that Chacha dole-outs at the start of the year probably came from the ACAP because there's no 4-piece process, there's no list of beneficiaries. If the speaker or whoever was behind the People's Initiative Chacha move, there was a slush fund called ACAP inserted by the House of Representatives in the budget process last year. It was not in the executive budget last year. It's not in the executive budget this year.
Sunny, let me get that clear. No? So when you say the president has control over the pork barrel, you're referring to ACAP as the new pork barrel.
Not just ACAP. Every year, January, February, March, is a budget call. All the agencies are asked to submit their budgets, and they're usually quite big. I think if you add up all the requests of agencies, it might be about 9 trillion pesos right now. The thing is, before, under PDAF, you saw at least that was crazy, but at least you saw the lobbying of what district, what representative, what senator got for whatever purposes they had. When the Supreme Court said, okay, you can't do that anymore, legislators shouldn't have those kinds of funds, what happened was it was shifted from the public eye from August to December, more or less. It was shifted from the public eye August to December to some weird backroom transactions in January to March where legislators approach secretaries, the budget secretary, the DPWH secretary, the DSW secretary, they start inserting their preferred projects and it's hidden. So technically, we could go through the 3,000, 4,000 page budget. Technically, we go through trends in terms of how much there's an increase in in infrastructure projects or social welfare projects, depending on who's in power. But that's super tedious, and I don't think anyone's ever tried doing that. But the thing is, the point is, if I was a congressman or a senator, I wanted pork. Pre-PDAF decision, I would have to argue for that in public during the hearings, July to December. Post-decision, I now talk to some secretaries and they sneak in my request, and it's noted by the budget secretary. The budget secretary knows everything. It's noted by the budget secretary, and then they submit it to Congress in July, and all the pork allocations are there. You have a bit more. I think it's a bit greediness now. If despite that, they sneak in the unprogrammed funds. That again might be an unintended consequence. Maybe because that first round of negotiating in the first quarter wasn't enough. Maybe, depending on political developments, maybe other legislators wanted to assert more, or maybe they had more leverage. I don't know, for the budget season. And now they're using the mechanism of unprogrammed funds to increase their pork even more. But the pork battle, in the sense that it's integrated in the executive budget passed to Congress, the president through the DBM and the DOF has complete control over that.
Okay, Sunny, what are your thoughts on the DPWH also getting the lion's share of the budget for next year? They have a 1 trillion peso allocation, but traditionally, and just based on the Constitution, we know that the education department, or the education sector rather, has always had the highest allocation in the budget. But earlier today, President Marcos did say they're changing the way budgets are structured to ensure that big ticket projects are not delayed. What are your thoughts on that?
I think the infrastructure budget is about 1.5, a bit over, probably over 1.5 trillion right now. This is distributed across many agencies. About 1.1 trillion is already in DPWH because of the 289 billion budget increase by the BICAM. I have three major points about that. Infrastructure, for some reason, it's so biased against social needs. Did you know less than 1, 2, or 3% of the total infrastructure budget goes to hospitals, classrooms, or even irrigation? So the sort of the socially necessary infrastructure that is not in the priority of the 1.5 trillion infrastructure project. So point number one. Point number two, specifically in DPWH, we have a copy of the BICAM report. It's so suspicious. Like you said, the biggest increase by the BICAM was the 289 billion increase in DPWH to bring it to over 1 trillion pesos. We could not see anything anywhere in the BICAM Conference Committee report detailing that 289 billion. It might be because we were not given the complete file, but it's a 230-page file. I can't imagine why it wouldn't be there. So a lot of lack of transparency, even at the BICAM level. And third point, actually, the COA should be able to help track all these dubious projects, flood control projects or whatever multi-purpose centers. But unfortunately, the COA is so undermanned, they can't actually audit everything. You could request for a special audit. We've tried to do it with some allies before. There's always a political barrier. If somewhere in the powers that be don't want confidential funds audited, or they don't want infrastructure funds audited, it's not going to happen. And COA they're so overworked, they can just say, it can't happen right now. And then if they attend to it 3-4 years later, tapos na yung laban, then everyone's moved on, liquidation's gone. So I think there are institutional constraints, but most of all political constraints, actually getting some accountability on not just DPWH, but infrastructure funds, which are not even going to socially necessary infrastructure.
Okay, what can the president do at this point? We are heading to year end. and we need the budget signed right away. Sabi niya hindi daw siya mag-line item veto because that's a tedious process. He says he plans to restore the DepEd budget pero naiintindihan niya yung sa PhilHealth. I mean, are you familiar with what the president can do at this point?
Well, okay. First, there was a problem to begin with. It was the president himself who certified the budget as urgent. So in terms of intent, the president set the framework for this lack of transparency in the budget process. Also, without the BICAM conference committee actually functions. In an ideal world, what could the president do? I heard the news reports that were being mentioned earlier. Return it to Congress. I mean, should we be held hostage by the timetable? I mean, the bottom line is we are getting a really bad anti-development, anti-people, pro-pork, pro-politician, pro-patronage budget. Are we going to let the lack of time be an excuse to let that budget pass? Because, again, elections campaign, people are going to forget about this. So for us, a decent president would draw the line. A decent president would say, I admit, this is a really bad budget. People's needs aren't being provided for. There's too much for politicians, pork, infrastructure, not enough for education, health, housing, social protection. Let's go back to the drawing board. And then, okay, I mean, you can actually have supplementary budgets passed to get us to whatever, the next January, February, maybe until the third quarter. I mean, before the elections. I mean, things can be done. But I think we're being held hostage right now by a timetable that's actually misprioritizing. Sorry, that's a mispriority, I think, to obsess about the timetable because there are ways to extend budget deliberations, and the government is not going to shut down. They can pass supplementary budgets to get us through a proper discussion of the budget next year.
Well, very straightforward insights right there. You describe the budget as it is supposed to be described. Thank you so much for weighing in on that with us. Ibon Foundation Executive Director, Sunny Africa.
Still on taxpayers' money, this time in the form of the Office of the Vice President's confidential funds. For former Commission on Audit Chief Heidi Mendoza, there is nothing irregular about using aliases when it comes to secret funds. And just like Mary Grace Piatos, that the Philippine Statistics Authority found no proof of birth of. However, former Commissioner Mendoza told our sister program Storycon that there should be internal controls for this. She explained that a government agency, in this case the OVP, should have put the list of all secret recipients in a journal and kept documentary evidence of payment for each. These documents should be placed in a vault and presented when asked for audit reasons.
Pwede gumamit ng alias. Pero sabi ko nga, ang basis of the certification, ano nakalagay doon? Na kung ikaw ay mahingan ng pagkakataong katulad nito, di ba, upon demand, ilalabas mo ngayon yung iyong journal na kung saan na ang tunay na pangalan na. But take note, ha? Sabi alias, pero may mga pangalang nag-positive doon sa PSA. So, ang ibig sabihin, meron ba kayong ginamit ang alias? Meron namang ilan na hindi ginamit ang alias at ang ginamit ay tunay na pangalan?
Time for a quick pause, but up next, jailed OFW Jane Veloso is expected to be flown back to the Philippines this week. The details on her homecoming when we return. Keep it here.
Welcome back. You're still watching the big story here on One News.
PhilHealth officials are being questioned after a known health advocate leaked its plans of an extravagant celebration for their 50th or 30th anniversary next year. The state insurer allegedly plans to spend around 138 million pesos for that event, even as Congress declined their subsidy or made their subsidy or cut their subsidy for 2025. Camille Samonte with the report.
Health advocate Dr. Tony Leachon is going viral over his post about the alleged breakdown of the almost 138 million pesos budget PhilHealth is planning to spend for their 30th anniversary party next year. Among those they would spend this on are coffee table books, giveaways, murals, outreach programs, and not just one, but a lot of parties. The bicameral conference committee denied the 74 billion peso subsidy the state insurer is requesting for next year. Their condition is for PhilHealth to dip into their 600 billion peso reserve funds first. That's why Shawn asks, why the need for a lavish celebration when there's a lot in need of funding for 2025?
Celebrations are not important kung sakaling may ganitong klaseng problema when the people are suffering. Kung hindi natin sila na-call out ng attention, hindi nila yan pag-iisipan.
In their defense, PhilHealth insisted that Shawn is misinformed. According to PhilHealth spokesperson Dr. Israel Pargas, what the health advocate publicized isn't the final breakdown, but only the proposal, which she said followed government procurement guidelines.
But that is a budget for the whole corporation para po sa lahat ng regional offices and lahat ng LEO offices. And the celebration po kasi is planned to be done the whole year.
For his part, Cagayan de Oro Representative Rufus Rodriguez appealed to PhilHealth to consider those who can benefit from the 138 million pesos budgeted for the event. He cited as an example 21,000 dialysis patients in the country. The Department of Health, however, assures beneficiaries that there's nothing to worry about even if the government doesn't subsidize PhilHealth. Secretary Ted Herbosa said their funds are enough to pay off the premium of indirect contributors or poor beneficiaries of the agency.
Mga nananakot lang at nag-agitate kung nagsasabing mawawala ng benepisyo ng PhilHealth. Napakarami po ng pera ng gano'n.
For News 5, Camille Samonte, we are One News.
Now here is something to celebrate. Looks like Mary Jane Veloso's return to the Philippines is finally happening. Veloso, jailed in Indonesia for drug-related charges, has been transferred to the capital, Jakarta, where documents for her transfer to the Philippines will be processed. And word is she'll be back home by the morning of Wednesday, December 18. Regina Lay has that story.
Mary Jane Veloso looked joyous when she transferred from the jail in Yogyakarta to Jakarta, Indonesia. For 14 years, she went to a total of 3 prisons in Indonesia. This time in Jakarta, her documents are being processed, finally, for her transfer to Philippine custody. Her parents and 2 children were supposed to fly to Indonesia yesterday for their final compassionate visit to Mary Jane. But the Indonesian government had it cancelled because of the prison transfer.
We were advised na to wag na ituloy yung visit kasi baka wala rin silang maabutan doon. Kami, hindi na rin kami tuloy. Andito kami sa Jakarta ngayon. Once we are informed na andito na si MJV, we're hoping to get consular access. And then from there, we'll know na kung kailan na talaga siya makakalipat papuntang Manila.
Despite this, Mary Jane's youngest is happy and excited because finally, the next time they will see their mother, she will be back in the Philippines.
Nagpapasalamat po ako sa Indonesian government dahil po sa wakas po makakalaya na po yung mama ko. Mararanasan ko na pong magkaroon ng nanay. Dahil po 1 taon at 4 na buwan po ako nung nakulong po yung nanay ko.
For the first Advent Mass, the Veloso family went to Baclaran Church, giving thanks over Mary Jane's return to the country. The Departments of Justice and Foreign Affairs had confirmed that this will happen before Christmas. She will be headed straight to the Correctional Institution for Women in Mandaluyong City, where she will complete her sentence while waiting for President Bongbong Marcos to issue executive clemency for Mary Jane. For News 5, I'm Regina Lay. We are One News.
Another quick break, but right after that, the DSWD opens the country's first ever food bank. Now, what exactly is it? Let's find out when the big story returns. Keep it here.
Welcome back. You're still watching the big story here on One News. The Department of Social Welfare and Development has launched the country's first ever food bank, and it has been dubbed as the Walang Gutom Kitchen. Here is Laila Panghilinan with the story.
The Department of Social Welfare and Development has launched Walang Gutom Kitchen at the Old Pogo Hub turned Oplan Pagabot Center in Pasay City. The First Lady Liza Araneta-Marcos graced the event and distributed hot meals to the beneficiaries of this program. This is the country's first ever public-private food bank, making a groundbreaking effort to address food shortage and reduce waste.
Ang basic na konsepto, 'di ba, sa mga hotel, sa mga restaurants, may mga sobra silang pagkain na kadalasan tinatapon lang. Yan yung nakikita natin araw-araw na marami nagsasabi, nanghihinayan sila, bakit tinatapon? Kesa itapon lang yung pagkain, maraming nagugutom, ibagsak nila dito, kami naman ang magsisigurado na yung mga nagugutom nating kababayan makakakuha ng pagkain araw-araw.
This initiative invites private sector partners from the food industry as well as individuals to donate surplus food supplies. It is rooted in Republic Act number 9803 or the Food Donation Act of 2009, which has only now been fully implemented. The DSWD has guaranteed that all food donors are thoroughly screened and come from reputable companies across various food industries. This ensures that the donated food is safe and nutritious, particularly for vulnerable groups such as homeless families, teens, and individuals seeking shelter at the Oplan Pagabot Center second floor.
Basta nagugutom ka, pwede ka pumunta dito. Wala tayong pipiliin. Every day, this center will open. And then, of course, while supply lasts.
Isang daan lang po, ma'am. Mapapakasya ko lang po sa amin para may mapakain lang po yung pamilya ko. Sa bangketa po ako natulog, ma'am. Kaya malaking pasasalamat ko po dahil sa DSWD, sa Walang Gutom program.
The Walang Gutom Kitchen welcomes anyone in need of a meal, extending its support beyond specific groups to all who are hungry. However, to ensure fairness and sustainability, patrons are encouraged to eat on-site as take-home food is not encouraged. For News 5, Laila Pangilinan, we are One News.
I did a story back then on Food Rescue Philippines, an NGO who gets the food wastage of buffets, restaurants, collects them and feeds them to the hungry. Ang ganda ng idea na to. Sana mapakalat pa nila yung walang gutom kitchens all over the Philippines.
Kasi sobrang daming nasasayang na pagkain, it's really heartbreaking. Na parang, bakit pa natin nahantayin na magkalkal yung mga tao, di ba?
I'm sure especially also this Christmas season, di ba, maraming handa rin yung mga tao. So there might be a lot of food wastage and it's good that...
Sinabi mo yung word handa, parang sumikip yung pants ko.
They should give this more publicity actually. Parang kahit tayo sa mga bahay natin, kung meron tayong mga hindi na uubos, dadalhin mo na lang doon para sa lahat. No?
Paano kayo? Medyo mahirap din siguro yung logistics, no? To check kung, panis na ba to, malinis. But,
pero nasa ano yun? Nasa batas yun. Parang they don't punish you pagka wala kang ill intention, pero pagka meron kang omission na kumbaga nakakalason o sinadya mo, punishable by ano rin yan, the law.
Alright, but for this Monday, that's the show for us tonight.
We are One News, all sides, all the time.
Magdala kayo ng lechon dun sa Walang Gutom Kitchen, pwedeng-pwede rin yan.